Welcome to Ollie's Authors Out Loud, a series of discussions with authors exploring their books, delving into the inspirations for their characters, themes, and stories, as well as discussing the craft of writing itself, the trials and victories authors experience seeing their work to completion. I am Susan Supak with my co-host Jean Greenlaw. Today, we have the honor of speaking with best-selling author Victoria Christopher Murray. Having written more than 30 novels, Victoria has taken us on a journey of many years of masterful writing. She is skilled, and I mean very skilled, at bringing important and influential women out of the shadows of history and into our awareness. Many of you will have already found your favorite reads in the best-selling novels, The First Ladies and The Personal Librarian that Victoria co-authored with Marie Benedict. If not, you need to check them out right away after you listen to this. Victoria's most recent book, Harlem Rhapsody, is yet another New York Times bestseller. Yay. Not surprisingly, Victoria is the recipient of numerous awards, including the prestigious Golden Pen Award for Best Inspirational Fiction and the Phyllis Whitley Trailblazer Award. To date, more than 3 million copies of her novel are in print. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you for being here. This is just amazing to have you here. We certainly appreciate you taking the time out of all your hard work to join us. And reading your background, we see that you took an unusual route to become such a wildly successful author. And as a speech pathologist, I took note that your undergraduate degree is in
Yes.
communication disorders. That's
Yes.
great. And following that, you received an MBA from New York Stern School of Business that led you on a 10-year path in corporate America. Then in 1997, you started your career as a professional writer. So we are very interested in your journey. Please tell us about going from communications disorders to the corporate world and how you extracted yourself from that world into realizing your dream of being a writer.
As you were saying, going through that, I was like, wow, I really did take an unlikely path because, but the thing that's so interesting is that I have always wanted to be a writer. I tell people I came out of my mother's womb knowing that. That's the only thing I've ever wanted to be was a writer. Well, there was a point when I wanted to be a ballet dancer because was taking ballet dance lessons. And then at one point when I was in kindergarten, I wanted to be the school crossing guard because I love Mrs. Kennedy so much. And I just wanted to be with that way how she was with kids. But I loved reading, and I wrote my very first masterpiece when I was 7 years old. And a lot of people think you can't write a masterpiece when you're 7, but you can if you plagiarize. Because I wrote something called Betty and the Witch, and it was about a little girl named Betty who wore a red uniform with a hood to school every day. She had 3 bears who were her brothers and 3 pigs were her sisters. And their best friends lived next door, and they were 7 little people. And I remember all of that. I know there was a good witch and a bad witch. I can't remember their parts. But the thing, though, the roles they played, I should say, but the thing that was so interesting was when I wrote it, and I used to write a lot. When I wrote that, I gave it to my parents because it was 20 pages long. And I was just impressed that it was 20 pages. And I gave it to my parents to read. And they read it, and without me knowing it, they gave it to my second grade teacher at one of those parent teacher conferences. Because my father used to always say, as I got older, I understood it. He said, watch how children play. And so my father always knew I was going to be a writer. He always knew that. So he gave it to my teacher, and she had the entire second grade perform it as a play. at one of
Wow.
those parent student assemblies. And there's a couple of things I remember about that time. I remember her telling me I could have any role I wanted because I'd written it. And that seemed very important to me. I remember some of the rehearsals, and then I remember the night of the play, and I'm sure it was probably awful. We were 7 years old, and we did the play. But when we went off stage, we took a bow, we went off stage, the teacher took my hand, and I did not know Mrs. Atkins was going to do this. And she brought me back to the stage and introduced me as the writer. I became a writer that night. I became a
Wonderful.
writer that night. But the thing is that you can't be what you don't see. I was 7 and I never saw, even though I always wanted to write, I was always reading. I never saw people who looked like me in a book. I never saw Black authors. I never saw Black characters. And so I don't think you could, even though I wanted to be this, it felt like a dream. I was already in high school by the time I read my first novel by a Black person, and it was Native Son, Richard Wright. And so by then, I think what happened was I was on this path of you have to go to college, you have to find something to do, and I was on that path. So that's how I ended up going to Hampton, and I majored in communication disorders. It was called speech pathology and audiology when I first went into college, but we were the first class to graduate with this communication disorders degree. I only chose it because I'd never heard of it. That's why 17-year-olds should not be planning their own future, because that is not how you plan your future. Because when I was going through the catalog, I had heard of biology, I'd heard of English, I'd heard of math, I really loved math, and I thought about majoring in math because I liked it. We should not be choosing our life, what we're going to do that way. But I did. I really enjoyed the theory of it in the classroom, but in junior year when we had to go out and do the clinicals, I didn't enjoy it at all. I was working with children. We didn't have a name for them, but they were autistic. And I didn't know, and I don't even think the teachers had prepared us enough to have success or to make sure that because I wanted results and I couldn't get results, and I thought it was me. So that's why I ended up going to grad school and getting my MBA. But I never, ever, ever lost the desire to write. And it wasn't until 1997, with the support of my husband, who said, "Look, when I met you, you said you were going to be a writer. How come 16 years later you haven't done it?" It wasn't until then that I wrote my first novel, and I haven't looked back since.
Wonderful. Your early books, such as the Seven Deadly Sins series, are very different from your latest historical fiction novels. What led you to change genres?
And it's so interesting because before I started writing historical fiction, I don't think I wrote to genres. I think there were people who put me in genres. So some people said I was writing inspirational fiction, Christian fiction. Some people said I was writing suspense when I wrote Stand Your Ground. So I never wrote to genres. I just wrote what was inside of me. And historical fiction is the first time I can say I'm writing to a specific genre. But how I came to it, but was quite by accident. It wasn't me. It was Marie Benedict, who had been writing all of these wonderful novels about women who'd been lost in history. And she came across a character by the name, or a real woman, but by the name of Belle de Costa Green. And Belle de Costa Green was the personal librarian for J.P. Morgan. And, we hear the word librarian and we think of one thing, but she was the woman who curated his amazing collection that is still there of rare books and manuscripts. And when Marie wanted to write about her, she discovered that she was Black. Everybody thought Belle de Costa Green was white, and she was Black passing for white. And Marie really wanted to write about this woman, and she felt that she could not do her justice unless she wrote with a Black author. And so that was many years ago when Marie came upon her. Unfortunately, the publishing industry is as segregated as the rest of this country. So she didn't know any Black authors, and it took a couple of years for her agent to connect with my agent after she read one of my novels, Stand Your Ground. And that's how I came to write historical fiction. So when I first wrote The Personal Librarian, I just thought I was going to do this special project and then go back to what I was writing. But I found as I was writing that those stories were important. Before, I was writing for entertainment. And as I started writing The Personal Librarian, I realized that I could combine education and entertainment. And when I started looking at all of these women who've been lost in the folds of history, I said, there's no going back now, especially at a time like this. There's no going back.
They're, along with being such interesting reads, I absolutely love this quote from you. You said, I start with women who've been lost in the folds of history, a story that is little known but should be well known. These women have achievements and accomplishments. We're standing on the shoulders of their achievements, but we don't know their names. Oh, wow. That is just an awesomely powerful quote. With that in mind, how do you choose the fascinating women you write about? I mean, I hear what you say about Marie when she was doing her research. It just sort of happened. It was an
Yeah.
accident. How do you go about uncovering these little hidden gems in history?
So it's really interesting because Marie and I thought we were going to write this one book together about this one woman and then go our separate ways. But as we started touring together, we found out that people were as fascinated with Belle's story as they were with Marie and I together. People were fascinated that we could write a book in one voice, and people start, as we were out signing and talking to people would come up to us and say, I want one of you, or I want one of you. Like, there was this hunger, no matter what they say on the media, there was this hunger for, and it was mostly women, although I do want to tell you a story about a white man, of women who wanted to have better relationships with the other race, with the opposite race. And they wanted, and so Maria and I said, okay, this is no longer just us writing. This is a mission. And it really started when we were on tour with the Personal Librarian, and I'm going to say older, but I'm 70. So he was probably 60. So I should say younger. A white man came up and he bought 2 copies of the Personal Librarian after we had spoken. And he said, I'm going to find a Black gentleman to read this book with. He said, I'm really scared, but I'm going to do it because I want to be like the two of you. And that's when we knew we were on a mission with our books. So together, we look for stories that show Black women and white women working together. And that's how we came up with the First Ladies. It's the real friendship of Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune. And that's how we came up with our next story that we're working on, and I'll tell you about it before we come to the end. So together we look for those kinds of stories. When it was time for me to write my solo project, I wanted to find a Black woman in history. I know they've been lost in the folds too. And my agent was the one that kind of directed me. She told me to first look for decades that I like, that I would want to spend a year and a half in. And I absolutely love the 20s and the 60s. And for very obvious reasons, as a writer, I can talk about the fashion and the slang and the food because they both stand out. They both have their own they're fraught with political situations and challenges, which I think I like as well, because they were both changing times. And so I started there. And when I was looking in the 20s, I started looking in cities like New York and everything, and I bumped into the Harlem Renaissance, bumped into it. And that's how I discovered Jessie Redmond Fawcett. But it wasn't easy because when I said Harlem Renaissance, I was like, I'm a Black writer. That would be perfect. Let me find a woman. But I didn't want to write about a woman whose name I knew. And I knew just from the research I'd done with Marie on the personal librarian and first ladies that you have to dig. You dig there and you're going to find some women. And I started digging and I found the woman who started the Harlem Renaissance, which is crazy to me that we don't know her name. But it's crazy to me that I didn't know the name of Jessie Redmond Fawcett as a writer, as a Black writer, but she was the very first Black woman to write a novel about the Black middle class. I've been writing novels about the Black middle class for the last 28 years. How could I have not been curious enough to find out who was the first person? So that's how I do. I just go digging, I pick a time period and then I go to see who I can find during that time period.
Well, I heard you speak at the Dallas Museum of Art earlier in the year. Unfortunately, Marie was ill and was back
Yes.
in the hotel, but you obviously have a close connection. And you've already said you're going to continue to write books together, but what is your process for writing with someone else? Do you assign certain chapters to pass them back and forth? How does it work to be co-writers?
Yes, and it's so good because when Marie first reached out to me with the personal librarian, she had never collaborated. So she wanted to know how to do it. And she's an attorney. So she wanted to know just the facts, lining up. And, I'm just the opposite. Like, I believe deadlines are just a suggestion. We just need to we're just gonna, pretend that this didn't just pass away. But what we do is we talk about the overall book first so that we decide, yes, this is the one we want to do. And then we break it up in chunks and we have these conversations by Zoom because she's in Pittsburgh and I'm in Washington, D.C. So we have these conversations of like the first 5, 6 chapters and we talk it through. We talk it through so much that with AI, one day they could just listen to us and, write it out. And then we just pick a chapter. Like I'll say, okay, I'm going to start it off. I'll do the first chapter after we've talked about it so much. She'll do the second chapter, whatever. And then we write that and then we switch. We give it to the other to go in and to do what they do. And in the beginning, I was a contemporary fiction writer. So the biggest challenge I had was the language of the 1920s for the personal librarian. And there was so many times when I just wanted Belle to say to JP Morgan, "What's up, dude?" But that wouldn't work, in the early 20th century language. But she would come in with her magic brush. And then Marie, again, is an attorney by trade. So sometimes she's just the facts. And she had done the scene where Belle and Bernard were intimate for the first time. And it was something like, they kissed at the door, they went inside, and then it was morning. And I was like, oh, no, 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 no. I had just written a book called Lust that ended up on Lifetime TV. No, no, no. And so then I would go in and Marie is so funny because she is always very quick to say, Victoria wrote that scene. I had nothing to do with it. She said it, especially the first time we were on tour together for that, and her parents were in the audience. So I thought that was good. That was fun. But we really, what I love about it is that when we turn in our book, we both feel like we've written this entire book together. Like we're doing edits for our book now. And I'm going through the edits of what our editor said for my chapters, but then I go and I read the next chapter's hers, I read it. And if I have a question, I, say, no, I don't want her to not have money here. I want to have a better arc on it. And then once we have all the notes in, we'll call each other and we'll say, yes, we're going to do this. No, we're going to do this. Every word of these books we write together.
To say, you mentioned the book Lust, and I write a column for our local newspaper. I'm the book review columnist, and I read at least 30 books a month.
Oh my God.
And I took out Lust from the library, and I always, because I'm disabled, I go up to the window. I don't go into the library, and so they know me. And the young woman handed me the book Lust, and she said, "Dr. Greenlaw, this isn't the usual kind of book that you take out." And I just laughed and I said, "Well, I'm going to be interviewing the author, so don't hold it
So
against me."
that is so funny. That is so funny. I
Yeah,
write pretty clean books, when it
right.
comes to that. So,
It's
but
just the
still, that's
titles
funny.
that grab you.
That process that you talked about passing back and forth, it's such a difference in a well-edited book. And I think by collaborating, that process just helps to edit a smoother book. I know we've all read books that were like, it's a great book, but man, did they send it to their editor? I mean, I know
Yeah.
some really famous authors, the editors tend to kind of let some things slide and you get into the books and you realize, so that's marvelous. That collaboration really helps with that.
And our editor doesn't let anything slide, and neither do our agents, because there are times when, and then even Marie reminded me that I had said this. I had sent her a text. We were on the phone with our editor, and she said that I sent her a text saying, "I hate you right now, but you're right." And and I don't remember sending it, but we have that kind of relationship. She is my writing soulmate. And especially the book we're working on now, which was a little bit different because it's more plot driven and character driven, and we had to really keep the pacing going. And I'm a little bit of a slower writer. I like it to unfold slower. It was more of a challenge for me than Marie, but I trusted her. I trusted her. And so I may not have liked it, and I let her know, and I said, "You better be right on this." But it was not hard for me to trust her.
I spoke with a mystery writer that was a friend of mine, and she said when she would get the packet back from her editor, she would just, without even opening it, she would call the editor and say, "Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments." And then she said, I was nice and polite and very sweet. And then she said, I'd open the packet and I'd immediately be like throwing things around, like, look,
Yep.
they don't know what's important. And then she said,
Yes.
and then I'd get out of the room and I'd come back and I'd look at it and go, that's probably not a bad idea. I always
That's
thought
what
that.
I used to do that all the time. I used to look and get the edits back, look at them in the old days when they would come in through the mail with the red, writing. And I would be like, don't they know who I am? Don't they know how many books I've written? What is she talking about? And then I sat down and I'm 99% of the edits I do.
Yeah, I can see why people immediately feel that way, like outrage because it's your baby. You've created
Worked
it.
for a year and a half on it, and somebody's going to tell you you have an ugly baby?
Yeah, yeah. That takes a while to get it
Yeah.
processed through. So, obviously your research is huge. I mean, that's really clear in how much is in this historical fiction, as they call it. So, based on that, I got kind of two questions. One, how much of it ends up as fact and how much of it ends up as fiction? And then along those lines, when you're reading a novel, a great novel, what is it that you look for? Because I'm sure that
Ooh.
guides you in your writing. So I kind of have two. I'm
Yeah, so
throwing
that's
at
a
you at
good.
the same time.
So, how much is fact and fiction? You know what's so interesting to me, and the thing I love the most? Well, when somebody says a book is that I've written a book that's well written, that's the highest compliment to me. But as a historical fiction writer, especially with Harlem Rhapsody, the number of people who have said this book is so well researched, it's a high compliment to me. But what I can't figure out is, how do you know? It is a high compliment to me because I went to Harlem for 5 weeks, stayed there for 5 weeks, went to the Schomburg Research Library every day like it was my job. I guess it was my job. Walked the streets, went to the church where she met County Cullen, took pictures, stood there, stood in front of her brownstone, stood in front of where the YMCA was, where Langston Hughes lived, went to the Schomburg, which was the 135th Street Library in the book, and it's the library of the Harlem Renaissance. So I put myself in there, read 2 biographies of W.E.B. Du Bois, read the biography of Langston Hughes, read, because she didn't have any. There was somebody had done a thesis on her. I read all of that at the Schomburg, did all of that. And so I'm so happy that it shows up in the book. But what I will say about fact and fiction is every single scene in the book is based on fact. And what I mean by that is I know the day she arrived in New York. I know the day she arrived. I know she lived in Harlem. I know that Du Bois helped her get the brownstone. And so I know where the brownstone was. And I know she arrived there. Now, she either arrived there, some people say she arrived with her sister, but then I found her sister and Jesse having 2 different addresses. So I kind of believe she arrived with her mother. That's the thing about historical fiction, too. You will get people saying 2 opposite things. And then I make the choice of what works best for the story and what I really believe. And so that's all I know. So from that, I wrote the first chapter. So what the fiction part is, she's stepping out of the cab and she's hearing the music. I don't know that, but I can extrapolate it from what I do know. So even the parts I make up, I say are based on fact. And what I mean by that is that Harlem at that time was so alive and people had their windows open and music was playing and Mamie Smith was popular and kids would have been running up and down the steps. I don't know if W.E.B. was there, but there's no problem with that being fiction because he is part of her life for real. And so that's where it comes in. Even the fiction is based on fact. The second chapter where she shows up at the NAACP offices, she showed up on that day. I don't know if she stood in front of the building and looked up at the building like that, but I can imagine her excitement of being the first, and she was the only literary editor of the crisis. I would have taken a moment, you know? The people that were in the novel, there's not one made up character, except for like the waiters and things like that. But the lady, I can't remember her name right now, who met her at the door, the receptionist, real names, all of the people, Mary White Ovington, all of them are real. So the people and the situations are real. I don't know what they said. I don't know what they wore. I don't know which restaurant they went to. That becomes the fiction. But I always want people, I think people feel like everything is so real because even my fiction is based on fact. Does that make sense?
It
Right.
makes perfect sense. And that passage about her getting out of the cab when she's in Harlem is one of my favorite. I just love that. I used to live around New York City and I just see that so much. And that the research you described, what a great tour that would make of
Yes.
going to her brownstone and then to the theater or to,
Yeah.
wherever, the library.
Somebody did that with me on TikTok. And so we went to the 4 places and she asked me 3 questions about the 4 places. So it was really fun to do that. And then, so what I look for, especially in historical fiction novels, because what I love about it being historical fiction is that it makes history accessible. I am not going to sit down and read a textbook. I'm not. I'm not. I want the drama. I want the entertainment. And so what I look for now is I'm assuming the drama is going to be there, the entertainment's going to be there, but I want to learn something now. When I'm reading historical fiction, I want to learn something, and that's come from all the things that I've learned. That's what I look for. Well-written book, and I've just finished 2 very good ones. One that's about to come out, one that's already out. And there's nothing better than a good book. Well, you two know this. There's nothing better than a good book.
I was very interested in her relationship with her mother, who
Yes.
really did not approve of though she loved her and respected what she was doing job-wise, she really was disapproving of her relationship with Du Bois. And that runs through the book.
Yes.
How did you've talked about fact and fiction. How did you find information about the relationship, or did you create that?
So I found information about the relationship, and then there were things again that I could extrapolate. So, for example, Isabella Huff, who I absolutely adore as a woman, and her mother needs her own book, was really everything in there. I never change anyone's character of who they are. So, like, I wouldn't have said they had an affair if they didn't have an affair. Huff was a white Jewish woman who converted to Christianity after she met her father. When I found that out, I was like, why would a white woman who was a widow with 3 children have married this widower with 7 children and this little toddler? Because Jessie was very young when her mother died. And I couldn't figure out, why would a white woman marry a black man at the end of the 1800s? I just couldn't. Well, not with the rise of Jim Crow and segregation and everything. And I couldn't even write anymore until I found out more about Isabella Huff Fawcett. And my agent was trying to help me, trying to determine why would she have done it. Something told me to go to the census. I was looking for Isabella's parents because I know that we are the product of our parents. I didn't find anything about it. I think I may have found the parent's name, but I found out that her first husband was black. And then I found out that she was an integrationist, a term I had never heard of before. And integrationists were just abolitionists who became integrationists. And they believed that the only way we could have total equality was full integration of the races. And so Isabella Huff Fawcett was going to integrate this country all by herself because she married a black man twice. She had 3 mixed children in each of the marriages. So from there, and then I had that. And so I got to understand what integrationists believed. And then I had one letter, just one letter, that Isabella had written to Helen, the sister, about how she disapproved of Jessie with WEB. So that's all I had. So having that, I only need one because I'm a mama and I had a mama. And my mama would not have been happy. My mother didn't like half of my boyfriends, let alone a married man. So that my mother and father would not have been happy with that. But also what I was able to extrapolate about who Isabella was. Jessie was the very first Black young woman to graduate from the Philadelphia High School for Girls, which is still to this day a very prestigious school. It would be hard for me to believe that Isabella didn't use her influence to get her daughter into that school. Jessie was the first young Black woman to graduate from Cornell. That was because the school that she wanted to go to wouldn't let her in. It would be hard for me to believe that Isabella didn't use her white privilege to direct her daughter's life. Never letting her forget she was Black, but using her white privilege to help her get the best of everything. Because Jessie had the best of everything, and the only mother she knew was Isabella. And so I, again, extrapolated it based on fact, based on the fact that she was an integrationist, based on the fact, how did Jessie get into the high school of, Philadelphia High School for Girls? All of that. And so I don't have any proof of that, but it makes perfect sense to me.
Good. Many of us have people who have changed our lives. You've talked a lot about strong women. Can you talk about anyone who's had an effect on your life?
Yes. Well, of course, my parents, who just always believed, I got, I'd say expelled, but I wasn't expelled. I was kicked out of school for one day in the 3rd grade. Because we were learning about England, and the teacher was telling me that there was telling of the class about the queens and the kings and how they, ran like the monarchs, and we were learning about that. And she said there was a Queen Victoria. And I told her she needed to go back to college because I was Queen Victoria. And that was because my parents told me I was Queen Victoria. I dressed every Halloween as Queen Victoria. I dressed for every birthday party as Queen Victoria. And I didn't know people could have the same names. You know what I mean? So I told her she needed to go back to college. And I kept saying it, and I wouldn't let the class go on so I got kind of kicked out of school because that came from my parents. And they really had me believing I was Queen Victoria. So they took me home and said, okay, so let's explain this. First of all, you're not to talk up to the teacher that way. Yes, you are Queen Victoria, but there's another one. And so my parents, who just totally believed I could do and be anything. But the people who changed my life was my second grade teacher. She saw this little black girl, a white teacher, saw this little black girl, wanted to do this play, wanted to call me a writer. And we moved from Brooklyn at the end of that school year to Queens, out to the suburbs. And I'll never forget this. And I was only 7, about to be 8, when she said to me, "You're going to go far.
Mhm.
You're going to go far. Just listen to your parents, listen to your teachers. You're going to go far." I didn't know what go far meant, but I knew she was happy and proud of me. Then when I got to high school, again, I was in a predominantly white school, and I was in the library all the time. Like, all kids would be outside hanging around. I was in the library. Became great friends with the librarian, again, another white woman. And she was the one who brought me Native Son. She said, maybe during the middle of high school year, she said, "There's some books I want you to read." And I'm like, "I'm in here reading everything. What are you talking about?" And she ordered several black titles for me. She knew I had to. So uh, she saw me. She saw me before I saw myself. She knew what I needed to be, what needed to be poured into me. And from there, my parents started buying me, I don't even think they thought of it. They were just buying the popular books. And from there, even my parents started buying me those books. Those two white women changed my life. They saw a little black girl and gave this little black girl what she needed. And I will always remember them.
It's so interesting you use that term, they saw you. That need to be seen is so important, that we need to be seen for who we are, not what someone else wants us to be. And
Yeah.
I just think that's such an important concept.
There were no black book. This was in the late 60s. There were in the early 70s. There were no black titles in the library, but how many could there have been? And this librarian ordered black books. She ordered them for me, but she wanted everybody else in the school to read it as well. And for somebody to think about that and to do that, I just think it's so important. They those two women and I can't say change my life, but they let me know that I was on the right trajectory. And they, especially my second grade teacher, I was saying to my mom a few years ago, I wish to God I could find her for her to know that I became what she said I was going. She introduced me as the writer of
Mhm.
Betty and the Witch, and I became that writer. And I was like, "Mommy, I just want her to know." And she's like, "She knows, she knows." I mean, I looked her up and everything, couldn't find her, but I wanted her to know.
Well, you also have won many awards, which Susan mentioned earlier. And Harlem Rhapsody has been recently recognized as one of the, I love this, one of Book Riot's best books of the year so far, 2025. How do awards affect you in your writing?
That's a good question. They don't affect me because, yesterday I was out with my cousin and we were just having dinner and somebody came over and said, "Oh my God, are you Victoria Christopher Murray?" And I was like, "Yeah, and that all still feels very strange to me. Even, getting an award, it just feels kind of strange because there's Victoria Christopher Murray over there, and then there's me, and I'm just here drinking water, trying to figure out, let me do my budget and where am I gonna go? I'm just, so they don't affect my writing at all, at all.
Okay.
I feel like every story I'm going to write was put inside of me before I was born, and I just have to find them. So the stories are already there. I just didn't know about them. But again, I guess I feel seen. I feel seen, and then I feel seen for the moment. One thing, I don't hold on to them. I'm It's like, what have you done for me lately? Now I have to go on to the next thing. So I feel seen, I feel appreciated. But as I said, if somebody writes me and says a book is well written and well researched, that's as good as any award for me. Now, the
I
Pulitzer
read
Prize.
some of that was written in my review of your Harlem Rhapsody. So
Oh, see that? I mean, because that's what I work on. I think the blessing that I have is that I'm going to leave something behind. When I pass on, there will be solid things that I will leave besides my daughter, my granddaughter, my son, but some my writing. And it's very important to me that 50 years from now, if someone picks up Harlem Rhapsody, it will be a time capsule, a little bit of that time. Even my contemporary books, I was very focused on it being a time capsule. Like I was leaving a message for history of what it was like in 2007 or 2018. And I want people to always say, it was well written, well researched. I want to leave work that not only I can be proud of, but other people can be proud of it.
well, you have quite a few books. Would you read a selection from one of them for us?
Oh, sure. I didn't know I was going to do this, but I can do it because I wrote it. So I can
There you
kind of.
go.
So I'm going to read from Harlem Rhapsody. And just a very short part, just the beginning of when Jessie Redmond Fawcett, the woman who started the Harlem Renaissance, the woman who we would not know Langston Hughes, County Cullen, Nella Larson, any of these people, because not only did she discover them when, like, I think County was 16 and Langston was 17, not only did she discover them, but she edited them, she mentored them, and she published them first. She published over 20 of Langston Hughes' first poems. So many that we know of the poems that we know wouldn't have been there without her. So this is her arriving in Harlem on Sunday, October 19th, 1919. I thrust open the taxicab's door, and the moment my heels hit the pavement, a cacophony of city sounds welcomes me. It's the music that enraptures me first. From a Victrola perched near an opened window, the lyrics from Harlem Blues float down, and then Mamie Smith's contralto drifts into the breeze. The joyous sound of two giggling girls skipping past draws me away from the song. "Oh, you're just bumping your gums," a man shouts, and uproarious laughter rises from the circle of men dawdling in front of the barbershop a few doors away. I stand there just absorbing it all, the patter of 1,000 footsteps of men and ladies and kiddies rushing past, motor cars chugging and clanking and clicking behind me, honking horns squealing into the air. This isn't a cacophony, it's a rhapsody, and my heart races to match its beat. Jessie! I face my mother, and I'm surprised to see her brown eyes framed by a frown. She points to my valise on the sidewalk next to hers. Are you expecting me to carry both? Oh, I laugh, and a smile feels her place. Apologies, my mom, but we're in New York. I twirl in front of her. Yes, we are, she says, giving me a short nod, but you're behaving as if you've never lived in a big city. Oh, you can't compare Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. to this. New York is everything. It's music and theater and come on, my mom. Carrying my valise, I rush towards the brownstone. At the first step, I glance over my shoulder, but my mother is standing in the same spot. In her pale gold overcoat and matching cloth, she is as fashionable as any New Yorker. But her eyes are wide as mine as she soaks in the city's vivacity. My heart swells for this woman who didn't birth me, but who, for the last 25 years, has nurtured me with love. Over the city's music, I call out, "Come on, Mama," in the same tone that she used with me a few moments before. At the front door, my hand trembles with excitement as I try to steady the key. But before I can insert the key, the door swings open. "Will, welcome to New York," he says. I study the man that I first contacted when I was a student at Cornell University some 16 years ago. His mustache has been trimmed since I last saw him in August, and there is a bit more silver blending into the jet black of his beard. As always, he's dressed impeccably in one of his brown three-piece suits. Tonight, though, he wears a more formal bow tie rather than the neckties I know he prefers. It's the twinkle in his eyes and his wide smile that draws me closer. However, just as I reach for him, I remember my mother. How had I forgotten about her so quickly? Well, that is the effect of W.E.B. Du Bois. His mere presence emits a magnetic force that is difficult for me to deny or resist. This is just a reminder that now living in New York, I must be measured in my actions. This will be different from seeing Will on his occasional stopovers in Washington, D.C. I shift so that my mother can enter our new apartment, but she doesn't take a single step. She expects an introduction. My mom, allow me to present Dr. William Du Bois. Mrs. Fawcett, it is my absolute pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. He takes her valise. My mother's smile has vanished. She steps over the threshold and greets Will with nothing more than a curt good afternoon.
You created an entire place for us. The sounds, the smells, everything is there. And that expressive language is throughout the entire book. It is indeed a rhapsody.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I love this book. I love the work I put in. I feel like I bled onto the pages. And I just love Jessie Redmond Fawcett. As flawed as she was, I love that lady.
It is a marvelous book. It truly is. And Jean, you're right. We're just right there. We're right there, getting out of that cab with her and going into that gorgeous brownstone. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she had a brownstone?
No, she had a
That's
brownstone
awesome.
in 1919.
Yeah, wow. Well, the challenges faced by the main characters in your novels reflect the challenges of women throughout history. And it can't be overstated that those challenges were multiplied many, many times over for Black women. What would you like your readers, and women in particular, to take away from the stories you write?
Oh, that's a good question because, there's nothing new under the sun. It's almost still all the same stuff going on. Um, their tenacity. One of the things that as I was researching and writing Jesse's story, I was like, my goodness, she goes through the same thing that women go through in corporate America today. And there's a dance she has to do and the balance and how she has to not upset this one and not upset that one. And I realized, but look what she accomplished and look what she did with less than what I have. And so, what I want people to do is to recognize these women, first of all, recognize their achievements, and to know that if they can do it, we can do it. And it's just their tenacity and perseverance and winning against all odds that I want people to take away from these books.
You had mentioned something else too in an earlier interview that I thought was very interesting. You mentioned that you hope that your books might be a launching pad to talk about race in a way that's safe.
Yes.
In book clubs or in conversations with friends, such like that man that you mentioned, I think. What an
Yeah.
incredible thing.
And all he said was, I brought two copies and I'm going to find a black gentleman to read it with. And I'm scared. That's all he said. And it changed our lives. He didn't say because we were signing books and moving the line. And I wish we had stayed in touch with him, to find out how it went. But that's what I do. I really do want this, especially the books that Marie and I write together. And then I feel even when I'm writing solo books, people will come to know me well enough to know that they can ask and talk about anything. And this is a safe place. Fiction is a safe place. And now Marie and I have had this thing called Conversations in Black and White, where we've had black and white book clubs meet up together and begin to have book club discussions about these books. And there's places where you can ask questions that you won't feel like you're offending someone because you're not asking it. You're asking about the character. And we want it to be a place where people can learn, when people can ask questions, but most importantly, where they can feel safe when asking these questions. That's the only way we're going to get out of this thing that we've created in this country, is to do it together. And we're going to have to do it, and we're going to have to take the lead as women doing it.
I agree. I agree.
Before we started this conversation, you said that you had been working on editing your next book.
Ooh, child.
And you've had a remarkable career, but would you talk about the projects you're working on now and what's upcoming?
Yes. So I think I was telling you, I checked a half an hour before we were to begin, and I was like, okay, good, I'm going to keep working. And 5 minutes later, I checked again, and I was like, it was 3 minutes before the interview, and I was like, oh my God. So that's what happens when I start writing and I get into these books. I take myself back to 1930s, which is the book that Marie and I are working on, our third book together. We're on the second phase of edits, and it's the story of the very first Black prosecutor in New York, Black female prosecutor in New York. And her great claim to fame is, have you ever seen the movie The Godfather?
Oh,
Like, who
God.
hasn't, right?
Many
Well,
times.
yeah, and so that is a compilation of many gangsters, mostly Lucky Luciano. That's the name we all know, like. So Eunice Carter's great claim to fame is she took down Lucky Luciano. He ended up going to prison for 50 years because of Eunice Carter.
Hmm.
And she did it with the assistance of the most notorious madam in the city, who both of them on different sides of the law had a reason to want to take him down. And one of the things I love about this book is when Marie and I wrote The First Ladies together, we were talking about Eleanor Roosevelt and Mary McLeod Bethune, two best friends. They were best friends. In fact, we have met Eleanor Roosevelt's granddaughter, who adores our book and who said that this was one of the best portrayals of her grandmother ever, of all the books she's read. And she said her grandmother used to say, because she remembers Mary, and she says her grandmother used to say, Mary McLeod Bethune is my best friend in my age group, and that makes her the most important friend I have. So she had divided it up in age groups. I wish we had known that quote ahead of time. We would have put that in the book. So they were very, very close. Here, these are two women who didn't know each other, and they don't particularly like each other because they're on opposite sides of the law. But we wanted a book like that to show that you don't have to be friends to be allies. And as we move forward in this country, we don't have to be friends, but we gotta be allies. And of course, they come to a greater understanding at the end because they were both successful in getting what they needed, because Polly needed him gone so she could continue her prostitution, as a madam. And Eunice needed him gone because she was trying to clean up organized crime. And so I love this book. It'll be out next summer, next June. So we are working on like the final edits right now.
So you're going to continue writing with her. Are you also going to continue your solo writing?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm already looking at my next, because as soon as we finish this book, I have to get started on my next solo. And I'm looking at, we know about historically Black colleges and universities. There were historically Black beaches because Black people weren't allowed to go to certain beaches. And my editor found out that two Black women founded Sag Harbor. And so, and I'm like, Sag Harbor, and we don't know this? But I guess that's what historical fiction's about, right? We don't know this. And so I went up to Sag Harbor, and the people are like, oh yeah, you don't know? And so I can't wait to look into that story and really begin, because one of the sisters was the very first Black female architect in the country. Um, but it was her sister who found the land. She was the one that did the planning of the land. They had problems with the KKK in New York. And nobody wanted to give them financing. So it was just fabulous the way they put this together. So I'm going to go and live there for a little while and get into that. So I'm very interested in the Sisters of Sag Harbor.
Well, so are we.
Right.
We can't wait. Thank you, Victoria. You have taken us on such a journey with your books, and you have informed us of so much, and I know that's coming in the future as well. And talking to you today has been absolutely inspiring. We
Oh, thank
look
you.
forward to your next book, and I'm so glad that you have taken us on this trip with you. Jean and I thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for such great questions. Thank you.